quirky, eccentric, twisted thinking, useless, dumb, weird. These are some of the adjectives that are commonly used for a large subset of the population that I will be referring to in this video, and that we'll be talking about in more detail in this video. Now, even though back in the day they were actually referred by all these adjectives, we've now come a long way in becoming more accepting and more tolerant and even celebrating this subset of people. And also in the space of healthcare, when you're working with them or even diagnosing them, they can teach us a lot and they pave a really unique path in how we can communicate with them. Who am I referring to? To learn more, stay tuned for the rest of this video. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shweta. I am the founder and lead coach of Healthy Dynamics. We are a coaching space that helps healthcare professionals from non-English speaking backgrounds improve their language and communication skills in order to build better, more positive, trustworthy relationships with their patients, build on their credibility, and also stand out as a person of excellence in their workplace. So apologies for the initial bit of the video. I was in my local library, that got crowded and noisy, and now I'm in the back of the library. So it's a beautiful view and it's a very nice day, and apologies if the lighting is not the best. That is a work in progress and I'm trying to fix that, and also if there's a little bit of noise coming through, I apologize for that as well. Alright, let's begin. So in the very beginning of the video, I described some adjectives that are typically used for a subset of the population that have really come into the light in the last decade or so. Now, these are people, in very simple terms, their brains are wired very differently. So in the sense that they don't perceive or communicate or understand or learn things the way people normally or typically do. And we call this group of people neurodivergence, and the concept that I'm going to be covering this video is neurodivergence. So as I explained previously, neurodivergence is when your brain structure and your brain, not necessarily chemistry, but the brain wiring is quite different to what is normal. Now, let's go back to our childhood, just to sort of give this a little bit of context. If you were back in your school days, do you remember being that kid or even knowing a kid or two who was always being picked on by teachers for being stupid, quirky, eccentric, crazy, and just someone a little bit more weird? And teachers would typically tell these kids that they're not going to go very far, they are not really progressing as well as the other students are, they're too hyperactive, they're too energetic, and all these students typically were ridiculed and made fun of. Now, and at that time, you're talking about 20-30 years ago, we had zero understanding of what neurodivergence was. But now, over the years, neurodivergence has become a very, very, not only popular, but also very visible and a strong factor that really defines, different humans in terms of how they operate and how they function in everyday life. So, as I explained in the very beginning of the video, neurodivergents have a different wiring of the brain. So how they in general would operate, as they would express themselves differently from people of their age or people just, of normally who are doing things of their age, and they would communicate differently. They had very specific quirks and interests that other kids or other students didn't in high school, and more often than not, they were not only bullied but really criticized, excluded, ostracized, and shunned, not only by teachers but also their peers, and they were told by everyone that they are not going to succeed or go very far in life because they're just weird in everybody else's eyes. However, over the years, neurodivergence has really gained a lot more visibility. There's a lot more awareness now, to the point that now even there's a day in the calendar year where neurodivergence is actually celebrated. And it should be celebrated, because one thing I want to make it completely clear, that neurodivergence is not a deficiency, it's actually just different. So everyone on this planet is different. As I talk about on this channel, I talk about how we as individuals, as healthcare providers, as well as patients, every single person is different, and neurodivergents are no exception. So even though in a lot of countries, neurodivergence is really sort of put down as a disability. It's far from it. It's just a different ability. So these people should not be ridiculed at any point. And if anything, some of the most successful people in the world are neurodivergent. I can think of a lot of examples. You've got Mark Zuckerberg, you've got Bill Gates, you've got Pablo Picasso, Neil Diamond, Leonardo da Vinci, Agatha Christie. A lot of these people, they fall into that spectrum. So neurodivergence is a spectrum. So it's not just one size fits all. Again, there's more diversity in the neurodivergent space also. And so the point being that over the years, neurodivergence has not only become normalized, but it's also being celebrated. And actually, one of my all-time favorite Netflix shows is Love on the Spectrum. I'm just going to leave a link of that up over here. I absolutely love the show because as much as I'm not a fan of reality shows and dating shows, I love the way romance and relationships are portrayed in this particular show, and all the people, all the contestants on the show are so genuine and so lovely, and you just don't have that facade and the drama and the bitchiness and the politics that you see in other dating reality shows. And the point of these shows is, again, to normalize the existence of neurodivergent people. So just again, back in the day, we lacked the awareness and understanding of what neurodivergence was about. However, now we have that, and therefore they deserve to take up space, they deserve to have voice, they deserve to have the recognition, rights, and all those different things that any neurotypical person, so a person who is normal, so quote unquote, deserves to have. Now, believe it or not, even I actually was showed some of the signs and symptoms of neurodivergence, and I'd like to think that I still do actually. However, have not actually got myself tested in any way because I personally do not see the point or the meaning of it. Because, as I said, for me, if I found out in some way, shape or form that I was neurodivergent, I would use it as a superpower and use it to my advantage. So, why am I talking about neurodivergence so much? That's not even the point of this channel. Now, as healthcare providers, we are going to be dealing with neurodivergent people on a regular basis, and we probably still are. So, we need to be well equipped on how we not only treat them, but also how we communicate with them, how we build relationships with them. And so they are a subset of the population that are very strongly represented, and they very frequently exist in our world at the moment. And so in this video, I'm just going to cover why is neurodivergence going to be significant in the healthcare space and how it's going to impact healthcare providers in the way that they treat and communicate with their patients. Now, before I get into the video, if you're enjoying what you're seeing on this channel and the content that I'm putting out, make sure that you hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell, as well as like the video if you like it, and so that the algorithm gods are pleased and happy and it can be distributed to the people who are going to get the most value out of it. So let's make a start. Why is neurodivergence a big deal for healthcare providers, or if it's not already, it should be? The number one reason is the concept of differentiation. So differentiation is something that I not only learned but also practiced a lot as an educational practitioner during my time as a high school teacher. Differentiation basically means that the way in which you provide information, you convey information, you give instructions, you communicate with a student or anyone for that matter, you have to do it in different ways for different people. Now, we already know that people who are neurodivergent, they process, learn, they apply, they absorb and consume information and interpret it in a very different way to other people. So when we are working with them as patients, we need to be able to differentiate in the way in which that we communicate with them and also treat them and also really form a relationship with them. So things, for example, that a healthcare provider might say in an element of humor, for example, can just as easily be misinterpreted by a neurodivergent person, or they could also incorrectly interpret it. Now, this is just one example. I'm just going to go into more examples in a bit. But yes, so like the way I had to differentiate my instructional cases when I was working in the education space, it's no different for healthcare providers when they are working with and treating with their patients, when they're communicating with them. That's the number one reason. Number two, as I mentioned previously, the way in which neurodivergents perceive information and things such as complex instructions, step-by-step processes, and the way in which a lot of, like when you're trying to explain to them symptoms of a particular condition, or when you're explaining to them a treatment plan, you have to chunk it down or simplify it or paraphrase it or give more examples to people who are, or patients who are neurodivergent, than say you would to a neurotypical person. So say for example you are a cancer specialist and the patient that you are treating is neurodivergent. So when you're talking to them about the symptoms of this particular cancer that you've diagnosed with them and they're showing the symptoms of, the way in which you would have to convey or explain that to them has to be much more methodical, chunked down, systematic. You have to use a lot of examples, visual clues and things like that. Otherwise, typically say an ADHD person, they will get distracted, they will start twiddling their thumbs, they will just completely switch off. A person who say for example has Tourette's, if you're explaining something to them, their response might be in a way that might come across as offensive, and even though that's really not what their intention is. A person who has Tourette's will typically, they will say things that are completely out of character. That again is not because they're doing it on purpose. It's because it's just because of the tics or they're twitching, and those reasons are the reasons why they're doing it. And similarly, people who have Asperger's, so for them, what they can only take on one bit of information at a time, or they can get very fixated on one particular part of the diagnosis or symptom you're explaining to them, and they might go on and on about it or expect you to explain that to them in much more detail. So the bottom line is the way in which neurodivergents perceive information is very different to the way, and perceive and process information is very different to the way neurotypicals do. And that's why it's very important that you differentiate not only that, but also instruct to them in ways that are very typically different to what you normally would for your other patients. Now, another huge reason is, surprise, surprise, you might be neurodivergent yourself as a healthcare provider. Now, as I said previously, you may not have even been aware of it. You may not even have known that neurodivergence existed, but you may well show the symptoms of neurodivergence. And that way, if you get yourself tested, if you choose to, you can actually tell your place of employment that there have to be certain accommodations that are to be made for you because you're neurodivergent. So the frequency of work that you take on, the type of work that you take on, the number of clients that you'd like to see, and the type of clients that you'd like to see will have to be different to work and operate with how you best perform and how you best show up for your patients. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go out of the way and get yourself tested if you're neurodivergent, but if you feel that the way that you work is somewhat different to other people, that means that your workplace might have to accommodate or make room for that. And that's why it's important for you to be aware that you might be showing certain signs. And again, if you want to get tested, that's completely up to you. But it's not going to make let it not be a reason why you feel that there's something wrong with you. That's my point. So if you feel like you're not able to take on the type of workload or the type of work that is typically other people, the rest of your colleagues can, neurodivergence may be the reason for that. That is number 3. Finally, you have to be able to explain neurodivergence to your patients. So not necessarily even the patients, but the parents of patients if you're working with children. So say for example, you are an occupational therapist or you are a speech pathologist. You might get a lot of children in as your patients who are delayed in their development, in their speech, in their articulation, in their nonverbal communication and things like that. And so not only do you have to be aware of what signs and symptoms they're showing of neurodivergence, you need to also be able to explain this to your patients when you are actually working with them. So a lot of the parents may not really have the level of education, they may really not have that level of awareness. So when you're actually working one-on-one with the patient and their parents, you need to be able to communicate that and tell the parent exactly where the reasons why their child is the way they are, and then again treat them and obviously work with them one-on-one accordingly that best suits their needs. So this is what today's video was about, why the role of neurodivergence and its surge really in the space of healthcare. Next video, which will be sometime next month, I'm going to look into how we as healthcare professionals can communicate better with the neurodivergent population, again in order to build better relationships, and really so that they can trust you and come back to you and they can rely on you. So as always, make sure that you like this video and subscribe and notify into the channel if you like the content that you're actually seeing. And I'm shooting this video on a Saturday, so have a good weekend or week wherever you are in the world when you watch this video, and I will see you next week same time. Thank you so much.